My topic is the legislature, the democratically elected representatives of the citizens as a whole of a body politic, the Parliament of the United Kingdom, the United States Congress. It was a British-American invention and a mighty engine of nationhood in our lands and beyond. But that was a long time ago. I contend that this antiquarian, ungainly, much derided institution remains essential to the nation and to conservatism. Modern government offers many opportunities for the exercise of unrepresentative political power. They are essential to ideologues, especially on the left, and are occasional temptations on the right. I think we should look to representation as a central means for discovering and propounding the common good. The legislature took shape at the dawn of Republican self-government in the 17th and 18th centuries. British barons, churchmen, a fledgling middle class wrested control of lawmaking and public finance from monarchs. In America, colonial assemblies rescued them from British governors. The legislature gained in power and prestige from the American Constitution, and in the 19th century, from the abolition of slavery, the extension of the voting franchise, and the triumph of the principle of democratic equality. Thereafter, thus empowered, it became instrumental to the expansion of government, but it also, for much of the 20th century, protected liberty and property in the face of that expansion. The forum has become so thoroughly associated with legitimate rule that even anti-Western dictatorships such as China and Russia operate faux legislatures. But modern times have been unkind to this great inheritance. It is besieged by multiple forces of affluence, technology, culture, habits of thought. These include instant communications, missionary bureaucracies, politicized courts, the ideology of expertise, and the progressives' quest for a democracy of personal rights and group identities. The legislature was fashioned by and for a world where transportation and communications were costly and burdensome. Governing required trekking to the national capital from near and far, where ambitious politicos learned of developments elsewhere in the realm, took the measure of far-flung allies and adversaries, strutted their stuff, conspired and dickered and socialized, formed coalitions and parties. This intense personal intercourse was integral to representative lawmaking, where law is born of negotiation and compromise among the disparate, often conflicting interests and values of a nation's citizens, regions, and associations. But thanks to our protean communications technologies, today's representative can do almost all of their politicking remotely and continuously. The results have been vociferous. In the virtual affinity network, deliberation is limited to one's immediate legislative co-conspirators. Many legislative sessions, from policy to committees to the whole, have become pre-scripted. Fraternizing with the enemy is no longer the political emollient it used to be. Social media encourages performative politics, where members seek to be individuals with strong public profiles rather than participants in an opaque collective process. A few years ago, I was a guest at a caucus of Republican senators to discuss tariff legislation. Each place was set with a bullet point paper, which I assumed was competing legislative drafts and their pros and cons and sponsors. Instead, it was a ranking of most liked Republican tweets of the week. On the reverse was most obnoxious and brazenly dishonest Democrat tweets of the week. That's a paraphrase. At the same time, much contemporary policy making has been absorbed by executive agencies and courts. The American executive state is an extreme case. In recent years, U.S. presidents have unilaterally issued momentous, highly controversial policies on immigration, energy, the environment, gun control, health care, racial preferences, sexual relations, and student loans. Virtually all of them would have required enactment by Congress in times past and would require enactment by Parliament in the UK today. And avoiding Congress is the whole point. Every presidential case was issued either in response to congressional inaction or opposition, or to excuse legislators of the president's own party from having to cast a difficult vote. Here's an example of how this works. As a candidate for president, Joe Biden proposed that those who had taken out federal loans to pay for college should have a sizable share of their loans forgiven. But that would take legislation, and the proposal had meager support in Congress from either party. Then, last August, with the midterm elections looming, President Biden issued a debt forgiveness program all on his own. It cost $430 billion, one of the largest single government expenditures in American history. The Supreme Court may strike it down, but the administration has contingency plans, and it's pretty easy to find ways to not collect money. The action was cheered by left progressives, but it has been deeply divisive. Those who decided to start a business rather than go to college and borrowed money to buy a truck have been made suckers, which is one reason Congress never would have done this. Law unhinged from representation is an important source of our angry polarization. Bureaucratic law is hardly unknown in the UK. Agencies issue devolved legislation. Hundreds of independent quangos exercise public power. Backbench conservatives call for greater parliamentary accountability, as in the recent report of the Regulatory Reform Group. Even cabinet ministers rail against the practices of their very own government. In Whitehall, as everywhere, administration can outmaneuver legislative process and words on paper, and sometimes, as in the case of Brexit, words on a government-sponsored referendum. But it makes a big difference that the British Prime Minister and Cabinet are part of and answerable to a representative legislature. They are obliged to contend with real, intense social conflicts that exist within their own governing party and in the Commons as a whole. The American President and Cabinet, being detached from Congress, can stage their own politics, pretending that those conflicts do not exist or are politically illegitimate. It seems to me that the British system is outperforming the American system these days. In the UK, immigration policy, energy controls are matters of debate and decision in the halls of Parliament. In the US, they are enacted by cunning bureaucracies that misrepresent what they are doing and outfox congressional oversight. Even devolved ministry policies appear to be more representative of public sentiments, at least on front-burner issues. The UK Department of Education is reportedly about to issue rules that generally ban schoolboys who want to be girls from competing in girls' sports and using girls' bathrooms and showers. The U.S. Department of Education has proposed rules to make trans sports the norm, actually banning state and school bans such as the UK's impending rules, and requiring case-by-case elaborate exemption procedures to protect girls' competition in specific sports. If the U.S. rule were a legislative proposal, it would fail badly. I'm not saying that legislation always or usually gets things right. Parliament's green energy policies are almost as pernicious as those of the U.S. regulators. British society, like American society, is suffering from deep troubles that government is doing little to address. Legislative minorities are often sentimental and rarely tough-minded, and they can be swept along with passing enthusiasms and panics. But in modern democracies, the alternatives are executive and judiciary operating outside their constitutional bounds. Investing them with political power is a long-standing elite project. The results reflect the views and interests of those who are highly educated, verbally adept, sophisticated, well-connected. Those people tend to favor rationalism in politics over the pragmatic compromises and down-home populism of the legislature. Most are left progressives, but the demographic also includes conservative intellectuals and politicians such as ourselves. Along with your Home Secretary, I share the view of William F. Buckley Jr., set forth a half-century ago, that it is better to be governed by the first 2,000 people in the Boston telephone directory than by the faculty of Harvard University. Since then, the professoriate and its progeny have gained control of much government power in tandem with the private institutions of science and culture, commerce, and media. National conservatives are brilliantly at the barricades against that hegemony. At the same time, we should be intent on returning political power to the phone book. That means reviving and improving the institution that represents everybody, including those who do not read our essays and speeches. Executive policymaking has an ideological bias, expertise, which holds that modern life demands government by expert administrators in place of amateur legislators. Expertise is an ideology because it insists axiomatically that contemporary problems have technical answers, settled science where there is little or no room for legitimate disagreement. The COVID pandemic dealt a serious blow to that ideology. It became clear to anyone paying attention that there were profound disagreements among experts over how to assess and respond to the pandemic, that effective responses depended on many unscientific questions of social behavior and political values, and that the public health bureaucracies often suppressed valuable health information, treating the public as simpletons, and stood in the way of effective tests, treatments, and vaccines. We can't blame everything on the experts and bureaucrats, however, because the UK House of Commons voted several times over for perverse lockdown and school closure policies similar to those mandated by executives in the United States and almost everywhere else. The votes were not party line and twice attracted large bipartisan majorities, with Labor saving the third vote when Tory defections reached 99. But Parliament was dealing with the insidious panic-mongering of the likes of Neil Ferguson, Professor of Mathematical Biology, and Matthew Hancock, Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. Other experts abroad, such as Sweden's Anders Tegnell, and politicians such as Florida's Ron DeSantis, performed brilliantly in the identical emergency. What we need now are authoritative histories of the science, politics, and results of the pandemic's management, aimed not at settling scores, but preparing to do better next time. Global warming and monetary policy, both expertise-infused, could use similar treatment. Good government integrates the specialized knowledge of experts and the generalized knowledge of politicians. That is better done by representative deliberation than by missionary bureaucracies. The ideology of judicial policymaking is that of rights proliferation and group protectionism. Vindicating individual and associational rights is an essential function of the courts, but we are now dealing with a competing conception of democracy itself. Consider Israel, where the Supreme Court and judicial offices are effectively self-perpetuating and hold decisive powers over the elected government. The current government would like to give elected representatives a leading role in judicial selection and the Knesset and executive agencies' independence from judicial control. The rallying cry of opponents in the streets, in the newspapers, in the Knesset is that these reforms are anti-democratic. Now that seems absurd or deliberate misdirection, but it is, I believe, utterly sincere. To the opposition, democracy means that individuals possess numerous highly defined rights established by courts and enforced and paid for by a compliant executive. This legislators just get in the way. This is a democracy of all against all, each armed with a variety of legal swords and shields, but it is illusory because it depends on the public goods and defense against foreign enemies, which only representative government can supply. Israel is an extreme case of tendencies that also exist in the UK and the US. The European Court of Human Rights, operating through the British Human Rights Act, employs elastic notions of privacy and autonomy to poach on Parliament on issues central to national democracy, including immigration. In the United States, progressives are now casting the Supreme Court as democratically illegitimate precisely because it has been returning controversial issues such as abortion from judicial dispensation to representative politics. These debates would profit from a forthright acknowledgement of the necessity of both rights and representation and the creative tension between them. National conservatives are well suited to lead these debates. Conservatives have been arguing among ourselves for centuries about natural rights and positive law, liberty and authority, autonomy and virtue, the universal and the particular. We are now reshaping them in response to the challenges of social disintegration and national decline. Our latest intellectual startup is common good conservatism. I love the term common good, a rebuke to morally agnostic liberal pluralism, and an assertion of the truth that there are things that are common to all of us and an interest that we have in the good that we share with each other. Its exponents argue powerfully that public officials should be guided by considerations of goodness and fairness that most all of us recognize as guides to personal conduct. They have advanced devastating critiques of U.S. Supreme Court decisions that prohibit our government from enforcing elementary standards of public decency and supporting straightforward national honor and patriotism. But the common gooders, being smart intellectuals, are sanguine about the capacity of judges and executives to settle moral controversies through purposive reasoning. Adrian Vermeule of Harvard Law School, a leading light of the movement, supported President Biden's national COVID vaccination order despite its very weak statutory grounding, which was duly rejected by the Supreme Court. His essential reasoning was this. Number one, there is no constitutional right to refuse vaccination. Number two, public health is a core duty of government. But that is hardly sufficient for a mandate that would have been enormously complex and evasive in circumstances where nearly everybody was getting vaccinated for free anyway, and some people had good reasons to abstain. If mandatory universal COVID vaccination was so obviously in the common good, many nations would have seen this and taken that step. Virtually none did. Several American states promoted vaccination but forbade private and local mandates. On momentous questions such as this, the place to determine the common good is, well, a House of Commons, a commune of the nation as a whole and as it is. That is where one and all come face to face with what their nation really looks like, rather than what they imagine it to be. It is where they learn of the variations in circumstances and perspectives that law must take account of if it is to be fair and good. It is where they are obliged to come to terms with those that they regard as deplorables in order that citizens may live in peace. If you are comprehensively pro-life and you notice that many other members are pro-choice, You may want to shift the opening conversation from the first trimester to the third trimester. It is said that the law must be a teacher, but the best teachers are avid listeners too. Do legislatures accurately represent the citizenry? Everyone is the product of traditions and compromises in electoral design and legislative procedure that should be open to discussion and improvement. The size of the House of Commons has been continually adjusted over time. Today, each member represents about 98,000 constituents on average. The House of Representatives has not been expanded since 1913, when the U.S. population was less than one-third what it is today. Its members now represent more than 760,000 constituents on average. The ancient design of the Commons chamber, with members facing each other up close and personal from undivided pews, should never, ever be converted to an auditorium. I am a first-past-the-post man, but don't mind experimenting with alternative election procedures, which I am confident will provide additional empirical support for my position. But issues such as these are beyond the immediate problem, which is that the legislature is being undermined and displaced by inferior, disuniting forms of law-giving. The changes are being propelled by the same forces of affluence, technology, culture, and habits of mind that are simultaneously undermining and displacing the family, the church, the school, and the business firm. Reviving the legislature would put it in a better position for the great tasks of reviving the others. Thank you.